Como les mencioné al principio, este es un premio que se estableció en la convención del pasado año y que Prisco ha querido continuar. Así que muchas gracias a la compañía de fomento a Prisco. Adelante, Pedro. Un aplauso para Excel. Quiero decirle que Excel forma parte de la Comisión de Actividades Especiales. Así que vino nuevo están en actividades del colegio. Bueno, el Colegio de Ingenieros se ha distinguido por presentar en sus actividades figuras de conocimiento, tanto locales como internacionales. Y damos como ejemplo al ingeniero local Federico Estuve, desarrollador de grandes proyectos residenciales y turísticos, tanto en Puerto Rico como en Panamá. Al ingeniero Alberto Alemán Subieta, quien fue ingeniero que nos dio una charla desde Panamá, administrador del Canal de Panamá. Estuvimos con nosotros al doctor Fernando Aramburú, hace poquito, pasado mayo, quien fue expresidente de la Comisión de Energía de Transporte de Panamá. Desde Chile nos acompañó el pasado año el ingeniero Andrés Sugaré, que estuvo a cargo del rescate de la mina de Atacama. El señor Carlos Enrique, conocido por todos, no tengo que mencionar mucho. Y este año, pues no podía ser mucho menos. Así que, como nos tiene acostumbrado nuestro colegio, tenemos un conferenciante de nivel mundial. Pero, para eso, quisiera que lo presente un amigo mío. Desde que empezamos a trabajar, el grupo empezó a trabajar para quién era la persona que nos iba a acompañar en el almuerzo de líderes emergentes de este año. Él estuvo muy entusiasmado con la iniciativa de traer a esta persona. Y es el ingeniero Ángel Jesús Rivera Montañez. Ángel Jesús es ingeniero civil, pertenece también al Comité de Actividades Especiales, presidente de Project Electric y desde hace una semana host de nuestra invitada especial. Así que con un fuerte aplauso, el ingeniero Ángel Jesús Rivera Montañez. ¿Está por ahí?
Bueno, muchas gracias, Ángel Luis, por tus palabras. Muy buenas tardes a todos y un caluroso saludo a todos los ingenieros y agrimensores que se han dado cita aquí en Río Grande. Un saludo también a todos nuestros amigos invitados, que sabemos que son muchos. Nuestro conferenciante nació en Freeway, Zambia, África. Hizo su servicio militar de 1980 al 83 en la Marina Mercante de Sudáfrica y posteriormente se unió a la división de rescate de Submarine, donde decide estudiar ciencias náuticas y se certifica como Master Mariner para el 1989. Está graduado de la UCC, University of Cape Town, de 1999. Posee título graduado de la Erasmus University en 2004. Trabajó en el rescate del buque petrolero Castillo-Berber en 1983. Trabajó como Moving Master en la instalación de líneas de gas submarinas en la bahía de Mosel, África del Sur en 1989 y como Mariner Manager en proyectos de Canal Pipeline. Trabajó en el rescate del tanquero brasileño Ru Azul en 1993. En el año 2009 fue el líder en alcanzar el contrato de servicios marinos de la planta de Canal en Angola. Trabajó como Project Manager en Caspian Pipeline, consorcio para la compañía Eurosix en Rusia. Ha trabajado con muchos casos de alto relieve ambiental, como lo son el AD19, el Tasman Spirit, el Icantrana y el Cota Cadó. En julio de 2011 se vio involucrado en el rescate del barco petrolero Brillante y Virtuoso, que fue atacado por piratas somalíes en el Golfo de Adén. Trabajó como director regional de la famosa compañía de rescate y remolques Vistor. Fundó en el RIC en el 2011 su compañía de servicios marinos Sloan Marine LTD. Ese mismo año fue nombrado en el panel de la compañía de seguros Lloyd como representante de pérdida especial. Durante su carrera de más de 27 años, nuestro invitado ha participado como maestro de operaciones de rescate en casos de alta relevancia relacionados a negocios de petróleo y gas en diferentes países como lo son Pakistán, Afganistán, Arabia Saudita, Yemen, Emiratos Árabes Unidos, los Estados Unidos, Australia, Nueva Guinea, Brasil, México, África y Hong Kong. El capitán ofrece conferencias sobre salvamento y accidentes a estudiantes de Derecho de la Universidad de Stellenbosch y Sandra en Sudáfrica. En el 2012, estando recuperando el barco de carga en Virrena, en Nueva Zelanda, encallado en el arrecife de recibe la noticia de que fue escogido por su vasta experiencia como capitán al mando de la misión de rescate del crucero Concordia, parado en la isla de Giglio, en Italia. Y utiliza una cita. Eso un mes en España, en club de su hogar. Cuando a mis amigos, el capitán iba a venir a Puerto Rico para explicar su misión antes que otro país, inclusive regresar a su casa. Muchos me dijeron, eso va a ser difícil, grande y pesado. Yo les dije, todo parece imposible hasta que se hace. El capitán me dio su palabra, cumplió aquí. I am pleased to present the boss, the captain of the operation, Captain Nicolás Sloan, who I ask you to receive with a round of applause.
Gracias. Hola, Puerto Rico, buenos días. Unfortunately, that's as far as it goes. I'm going to have to speak English. I have a very strong, so I hope you can understand. What I'm going to do is give you a visual presentation of the challenges that we met and overcame during the power buckling project, is what we called it. And most of them are behind the scenes. Okay. Most of them are behind the scenes pictures that you wouldn't have seen, along with some audio-visual clips. So it is indeed a huge honor and pleasure to be asked to address such an esteemed group of professionals such as the College of Engineers and Surveyors. So I'd like to thank you again for the invitation. What actually happened with the Costa Concordia to lead to such a dramatic situation? Well, apart from her port, Civitavecchia. Okay, maybe that's better. Okay, so she departed from her port, Civitavecchia, bound for Savona, right up on the northwest coast of Italy, and she deviated from her planned track to salute the flag to the island of Giglio. She obviously came too close, striking the uncharted rock La Scola. It's the #1 dive site in Italy, so it's quite well known, apart from to the captain. She lost power, and then fortuitously the wind and current blew her back, and she ended up finally balanced on the reef on the island of Giglio. And the way she was positioned actually saved thousands of lives. This was the original track that she was meant to be following in the white line. As you get closer to the island of Giglio, there's a restricted area. And obviously he altered course, almost coming in perpendicular to the island to salute the flag. Came far too close to these rocks down here on the southeast, drifted north, actually turned out to sea going to starboard, and then the ship completely under the power of just a slight wind and a southerly current ended up on this reef. It was Friday the 13th, midwinter. The island of Giglio was almost abandoned, and almost 4,200 people came ashore at midnight. That's how close it was to the little harbour entrance. She's a massive ship, and she was balanced on 2 reefs, one underneath the funnel and one just aft of the bridge. But perfectly even keel over all 300 meters. So there was a big international tender that went out that can we save the Costa Concordia? If you look at some of the profiles on the seabed, she was on an underwater cliff and almost about to fall into deeper water. They almost also said, what happens if it goes wrong? Then she would tumble down into deeper water and break apart. In the bottom you can see how big she is compared with the Kursk, which was the state-of-the-art salvage operation we did in 2001. We had no facts apart from what was given to us in the specifications. She's almost 3 football fields long, weighs over 100,000 tons, and that's her compared with the Empire State Building, a jumbo 747. On her tail, she's bigger than most buildings. And that's the Titanic in front of her. So this was the initial concept that we had, which was the one that they accepted. Basically, we had to hold her on the cliff while the salvage operation was carried out. She was between 2 cliffs, 2 reefs, so she had a big valley between them of about 100 meters and 25 meters deep. We had to fill it up with grout, cement, in bags by divers, roughly 24,000 tons, and build subsea platforms that she could be power buckled and then rest on. We had to cover the seabed of approximately 150 meters in length with these subsea platforms. Then we had these buoyancy tanks called sponsons. So the tall ones were the same height as an 11-story building, and the shorter ones 7-story buildings. And that would give us just over 60,000 cubic meters or tons of buoyancy. The ship itself had no strength or no tanks that we could rely on regaining any buoyancy, so everything had to be recreated from the outside. So basically you put some platforms on the seabed, you add some sponsons, you attach pulling wires from the top of the sponsons to the platforms, and then you pull her upright or power buckle her, and then she's sitting on the seabed, still with a draft of 32 meters or 10 stories. Anyway, that's what the concept said, and this is how it actually happened. It wasn't that easy. So over the first 3 months or 12 weeks, we had over 200 engineered documents had to be submitted to prove that the concept could be reasonably engineered to continue with the operation. For a normal design studio in the offshore industry, that's about 2 years of work. So we had 6 design companies working with us. And based on those engineering documents, we could then go out to tender and go and choose the right resources and contractors that we needed to fulfill the plan. At the same time, we're doing an environmental baseline survey. This part of Tuscany, or Giglio, is an aquatic environment. It's a sanctuary for whales and mammals. It really is beautiful. It also has these giant clams called Penia ignobis that had to be transplanted. They didn't know they existed on that side of the coast until we found them. In the background you see the Posidonia seagrass that was going to be damaged by the shadow cast by the ship. We had to do a starboard side damage assessment, all the unknown damage where she was lying on the reefs. So these are the shadow areas that you see, and they're roughly 25 meters by 25 meters each area. And we assumed that looking at the ship, she'd been crushed by about 6 to 8 meters into the ship. So we built a finite element model from the basis, from scratch, to represent all the structural elements under Deck 3. And we added on other structural elements to increase the strength of the vessel. We ended up with 1 million points of reference in the FEM analysis model. And we used the German model that they use for car crashes called LS Dyna. And basically we superimposed the ship onto the rocks and then pushed it down until it represented the bathymetry and the measurements of the survey that we did. And that told us what to expect with the damage. So on the aft body, which is the upper side, she was crushed by her own weight onto the reef by about 25 by 30 meters and about 6 to 8 meters into the ship, almost a third. And on the bow section, it was slightly worse because On that part of the ship they had a theatre that was about the same size as this room, but 3 stories high of the ship. So you lost a lot of structural strength in that location. Then we added on the weight of all the sponsons, and we ran a software program to see what would happen when we tried to power buckle. On the seabed you can see that these, the blue mats, those are the grout formations, and the grey ones are the platforms. So we had to change our planning to support the stern, which was going to fall off, and later on the bow, which was going to fall off. So that's a 3D rendition. When we took all the analysis and the information, and we had a 3-dimensional drawing of what we were looking at. It was quite graphic, and we were not allowed to show it to the authorities in case we scared them. But it's substantial damage to a ship that's already damaged on the port side. So we had to build up a structure to support this operation. So we set up 7 teams. 4 of them would be based on Giglio itself. 1 would be ashore, looking after shipyards and fabrication. Then we had commercial and the financial team. And then we had planning and logistics. Fortunately, Italy has a lot of shipyards and fabrication facilities, but they were all around Italy. So we used 5 shipyards and 7 major fabrication facilities and over 150 Italian subcontractors. So to manage all that, we divided the region into different regions and appointed management teams to oversee each region, and then liaise with logistics and the operational team to see how we could get the logistics to supply the platforms and sponsors in time for when we needed it. So the power buckling concept itself is quite simple. You just roll the ship upright. But if you see here, the profile of the seabed, we had to hold her in position and then roll her onto subsea platforms. And that made it more difficult. The island of Giglio is composed of granite, which is the hardest rock you can get. We had a lot of challenges to make sure that when we added these forces to the ship, that when we tried to pull her upright, we didn't crush her into pieces. So we could crush the ship just with the forces, or we could twist it with torsion and snap it. So that's how she lay when we first arrived. And on the site we divided the teams into 4. The very inshore was the holdback and landscaping anchor block system. The second team was near shore. That was all the big diving operations to put the 24,000 tons of cement bag into grout bags underneath her. Then we had the third team was the Concordia team itself, preparing the ship for the eventual forces we're going to put on it. And offshore, that's the drilling into the granite and all the crane support for putting the platforms and the sponsons on board the Concordia. Unfortunately, when we looked at the geophysical aspects of Giglio, where the ship was lying was not as easy as what we were hoping. Let me just go back to this one. So these are the anchor blocks we had to put on the seabed, on the inshore side. Each anchor block had to support 1,000 tons of lateral force, or shear force, and we had to landscape the rocks to get this perfectly level within 3 degrees of pitch, roll, and heading as the tolerance. We took core samples from the rocks in the seabed, and unfortunately we needed solid rock to get the micropiles and the anchor blocks to withstand these forces. This is looking down at the top, just gives you an overview of the profile of the seabed, and these on top there are the 12 anchor blocks we were hoping to install. We had major faults, geological faults, running right through the location. We had secondary faults going at a diagonal through the location. We had blocks that had tumbled down through the ages, off the mountain and down onto the seabed, with a large debris field right underneath the ship. So we went back and we looked at the rock formation on the land itself, which was exactly the same as under the water. And you can see that we have this turtle-like carapax, which has a hollow interface between that and the solid rock. We have vertical cooling joints, and then we had the carapaxes and hollow bases. So that we extrapolated underneath the shoreline, and we thought, okay, this is going to be more difficult than we thought to drill into this rock. So we had to penetrate 24 meters into the bedrock for the micropiles, and offshore for the large diameter drilling, 12 meters into the bedrock. So we had to get through the overburden to allow any chance of holding the forces. Here you can see a vague outline of the ship with the platforms and a bit of the bathymetry. There was also, apart from the granites and the gullies, there was a cliff thrown in between. So we had to modify the design of the platforms as we went. But we start with the inshore team, and the one with the crane next to the funnel, that's the landscaping team, and the one right here in the foreground, that's the large grout foundation. So this is what it looks like on the seabed that we had to landscape and prepare the anchor platforms for. So we called it landscaping because breaking rock doesn't sound environmentally friendly. Landscaping sounds more engineered. We had this hydraulic ram that could go down to 16 meters under the water level. And then we had what your dentist will call a mild flat file, just to smooth things over. So when you have a root canal treatment and then the dentist comes along with something like this, you know, the environmentalists don't like the look of it at all. But it works. You can see through the clear water some of the boulders. That's the hydraulic jack trying to crack away the rock. You can see the profile on the right-hand side is where the rock was before. Everything has to be monitored and mapped out on a seabed survey by divers and octants. And these were the fabrication of the inshore anchor blocks. That's installing one of the anchor blocks on the seabed. And they had very little space between them. They had to match the frames on the ship where we're going to exert the main pulling forces. So we had to strengthen the ship on certain of the web frames, and then those had to line up perfectly with the anchor blocks where we're going to be pulling from. So this is the micropile drilling platform, and she would follow the landscaping barge and then install these micropiles. That's a test tendon that we had. So we did a test tendon into the bare rock, and we managed to get 270 tons pull without any deflection or movement, which was perfect because we only needed 100 tons per micropile to make 1,000 tons of shear force. On top of those anchor blocks, we put these holdback towers. So each anchor block would get one tower, and then on top of those we have strand jacks that would come down around the anchor block trunnion and then 60 meters to the ship and hold her in position. So we pre-assembled all of these in La Spezia, and then when we were ready on site, we shipped them out on barges and installed them fully assembled on top of the anchor blocks. So this is the divers. They had to shim the towers to make sure we got the 3 degrees tolerance. It was very diving intensive, and a lot of people couldn't see any operations from the surface. It was mostly happening underwater. So you had to give the divers a lot of work to do, and then you had to watch them to make sure they were working. We had a lot of ROVs watching the divers. The team 2 was a grout bag installation. So this is what we wanted the seabed to look like when we'd finished the platforms and the grout. We were doing roughly 600 tons of capacity on the barge. The divers would go down onto the seabed and lay out the grout bags, and then we'd do a whole layer of grout bags, and then we'd mix up the cement grout and pump it down into the bags and let it cure. So these are the bags. It's a geotex textile, so it allows some of the finer water to seep through without any of the grout itself. And we had to put recovery straps. Every one of these blue straps is to allow us to recover the grout bags when the project's finished, or let's say the next phase of the project now. And then you build them up on the seabed. So roughly it was 150 meters long, of an angle of 35 to 45 degrees of slope, and we needed to get a perfect finish. This is the grout on the left and the platform drilling template on the right. And this is what we wanted to achieve before power buckle. So we're looking at from the bow all the way towards the stern. The ship will be lying on the rocks, and this is the valley between the two reefs. That's superimposing the ship on top of it. And then near her stern, because of the damage to her stern area, we had to build an extra profile of the grout, and that would support her stern or her bottom all the way through the power buckle itself. And we didn't want that to sag or fall off at all. And that's after the power buckle. You can see the grout on the right hand side, and she's laying perfectly straight on the platforms. So that was the concept. You can see the diver on the bottom. These are the small platforms on the left-hand side, with grout on the right. And the finish we wanted to achieve, the finish had to be perfect like a mattress. So the whole finish had to be as good as your bed when you lie down, to transfer the forces for the power buckle all the way along the length of the ship to make sure that the stern, the turn of the bilge did not collapse. This is a team on board the Concordia. So basically we had to stiffen the whole ship. There's no strength above deck 3 in a passenger ship. So all the weight is on the bottom, and above deck 3, that's all passenger space. Very light material, very little structural elements that you could rely on. So we absolutely discounted everything above deck 3 as far as reliability went. We welded doubler plates on every web frame, so that was every 2.7 meters. We put 40 millimeter doubler plates of high carbon steel along these frames. Now, of course, with the profile, everyone had to be harnessed, so everyone had to do a mountain climbing course before they could go on board, and even the welders had to strap themselves in while they were welding. So you can see as we went through the first winter, the welders are starting to make a checker pattern on the side, and that will fit perfectly to the sponson's grillage, which will be welded on top of that. Down underneath the yellow, you can see the hole from the final resting point of the rock. This is one of the patches we had to put over the damage, just to hold the chains that we take off. And these are the doubler plates we put on the turn of the bilge to support the chains that would run all around the ship's belly. Each frame had a slightly different profile, so each one had to be numbered, and we put the exact doubler plates on the right frame. And 80% of all the welds were inspected, NDT tested. We couldn't afford for a weld to fail once we were halfway through the power buckling operation. Of course, as you got towards the bow, the angle changed. It became more difficult for the welders. Then these were the subsea. These were the doubler plates that were going to go on the bottom of the starboard bilge. And the reason we have these pipes is to put the chains through that, so that the chain would be perfectly located on top of the frame. The chain was quite big. It was 5 1/4 inch. So one link is 370 kilograms. We had 56 containers from around the world, and there wasn't much stock left. How you put that in position, you don't have to worry about. You just tell the divers to do it. So before we could actually put the divers underneath, we had to stabilize the ship. And these were the stabilization strand jacks that went underneath the ship's belly and back to the shoreline to hold her in position. These are hydraulic jacks, and that gave us roughly 4,000 tons of holdback capacity, just to allow us to trust that the ship would not move too much whilst we were trying to carry out the rest of the operation. Of course, everything's at an angle. You have to be clipped in with a safety harness, and then you've got to position these very accurately onto the templates. But once we were tensioned up, then at least we knew that the divers could carry on without any undue concerns about the ship moving. Strand jacks became a very important part of the whole operation, and we used 172 strand jacks for the power buckling, the holdback, and the sponson installation. It's quite a substantial contract for the company that thought they were going to do 16 holdback strand jacks. The offshore team, that was team number 4, they were doing the large diameter drilling, and then all the support for the platform installation and the sponsons and general crane support. Large diameter drilling, the drill head and the drill bit is 2 meter diameter, so almost the diameter of your table that you're sitting at. This was for the platform leg and piles to go in, and we had to get 12 meters into solid bedrock. So once we got through the overburden and into the bedrock, then we had to start measuring the depth and adjust the pile length on the go. Also, because it's an environmentally sensitive location, all of the cuttings had to be recovered, so it was a closed drilling system. So that meant that all of the drilling cuttings would be flushed back to the surface with an airlift. We'd have these shakers and scrubbers that would actually separate the water from the cuttings from the drill. And even though it's part of Gilio bedrock, we had to pay for it to be disposed ashore. It was perfectly good white granite. So this is the size of the drill tower head over the side and the hole in the seabed. And this is the footprint on the work barge that it takes. So this is the work barge before the drill spread's put on, and that's afterwards. So you need to work out how much area you need for every operation and then find the right tool to support that operation. There you can see the drill tower just on your left-hand side of this vessel, and that's drilling the piles in the exact same footprint as the fabrication yard on the other side of Italy is building the platform legs. How do you get that right over 150 meters? With difficulty. So we built a subsea template, and this had hydraulic legs that could take up the difference in the slope of the seabed. And it had a 6 meter column to give us the vertical tolerance that we required to achieve. So that's the baby template for the small platforms under her stern. And this is the larger template for the bigger platforms. So this weighed 270 tons alone, just for this template. But what it allowed us to do is that if we could stabilize the template and drill through the sleeves, we could be pretty sure that the legs of the platform would fit once it was delivered. Normally in the offshore sector, you'd build the platform, install it, and pile the feet. We had to pre-drill the holes and then install the legs. But the environmentalists were happy, the fish were back. the noise from the drilling had actually attracted big schools of tuna that they'd never had before. So there was some good. This was a packer that we designed and built. It was to inject water glass inside the casing to try and stabilize the overburden. So you'd have to leave it for 5 days, and then the water glass would crystallize the sand and increase the strength to about 10 MPa, and that would allow you to get the drill head into it. So these are the baby platforms going underneath her stern. That's number 6, number 5, and number 4. And then you had number 1, 2, and 3 were slightly bigger. So the 3 of them alone were the size of a football field, weighing 1,000 tons each. And the footprint of the leg for the 6 legs, we had less than 1% tolerance for error in the verticality of the holes before these would not fit. The bumpers on the front would support the final phase of the grout, so that when the ship rolls on the grout, the force will be transferred into the grout, into the front of the bumper, and into the seabed, and that will stabilize the whole grout foundation. To install it we had to get specialized vessels, heavy lift vessels. This is putting the bows in. Obviously everyone was very worried about whether we could achieve it. There's a little ROV watching another ROV watching the bows go in. You can see the leg going in the hole. It was a very happy sight to see it going in so smoothly. And that was the last leg, leg number 6, with the grout seals going in. And everything we did, we had to use these micro ROVs to give us an eyeball on north, south, east and west of the piles themselves. But it was quite a challenge, and when the platforms went in, we were very happy that everything was in tolerance. So life on board the Concordia, obviously she's on her side, so we made a false deck so we could walk at. On the right-hand side is the actual walkway. And it's 270 meters long on the boat deck. It's very difficult to see the end of it, but it gave us a perfect working platform. And this was our main operations. We could hang all the tools, welding cables, build a workshop, welding stations. Of course, the sponsons, we had to change the layout of the sponsons once we had the feedback from the finite element modeling to show that the bow would fall off and the stern would fall off. We knew we couldn't install number 1 and 2 and 14, 15 sponsons on the bow of the stern, because that was 3,000-4,000 tons of weight that we didn't need for the power buckling. And you can see the support is only on the 3 large platforms in the middle and 3 baby platforms on the stern. Nothing underneath the bow. So the 27th of December 2012 we came up with a new arrangement, and then we had to redesign some of the sponsons and find out how to install them. Sponson fabrication was all around Italy, 5 shipyards. Each one of these sponsons was a pressure vessel that could take 2-bar differential over pressure. There's quite a pressure in such a large volume, so you don't want anything to go bang. Then you had to have the logistics to transport the sponsons to our holding base in Livorno, so that we had everything available and we could call it overnight when we wanted it. But we needed a lot of SBMTs. Once we got them, we had to rotate them. So these are 600 tons to 800 ton lifts, and we rotated them using a crane and a cradle on the side. Once they were all rotated, we could then fabricate the grillage on top, so that all the welding was top down. Then we did the load out with the heavy lift ship, They just fit inside the hold, and then bring them to test fit. So what we did was we did dimensional control with measuring the deflections on the hull using laser technology. And we'd take each frame and we're going to trim the profile of the grillage on the sponson to be the female of that profile, so that when it matched, it would be less than 5 to 8 millimeters for the welders who fill the gap. The first one went quite well. Obviously, just to be on top there, you're already 30 meters above the deck. The next day we did P11, just to see if we could get the tolerance. This is inside the grillage. This is the welding station, where the welders spent the next 4 months welding it all together. If you see the crack between the two, it's 38 millimeters. There was actually a very fine tolerance for salvage, and especially for shipwrecking. But everyone was quite chuffed when that went, so we knew that with the platforms installed in the first sponsons, we could certainly move ahead and do the power buckling. This was the last power buckling sponsons we installed before the power buckle, number 3. And then we had the challenge for the bow blisters. What are the bow blisters? Well, we had to support the bow. There was almost 90 meters of ship hanging over the platform, unsuspended. Roughly 12,000 tons of buoyancy was needed, or support. So we created the bow blisters. We took out the bow thrusters, put these 3 pipes through. Then we brought in the, what we call the twisted blister sisters, sunk them, wrapped them around the pipes, and then gave them some buoyancy to suck them onto the hull. The reality of the situation is that we had to install the pipes from the bottom to get the profile, the 3-dimensional profile of the support plate exact. It weighed 270 tons. It was made out of 94 millimeter diameter steel. And these were the sisters that were going to mount the pipes. It was 1,500 ton lift with a double hinge that would allow us to control the opening and movement of it with buoyancy and a few crane wires. And to control the buoyancy, each tank had three-dimensional shaped buoyancy tanks, which made it more difficult to control as it went through the different layers of water. The day arrived and we picked it up. She floated almost even keel, and we got ready for the installation. So we had to sink the starboard one completely underneath, and then the port one until she was literally only a meter above the surface. For this we had cameras on the inside of the sponson. We had ROV cameras, and we had locking pins, and each locking pin had a camera as well. After 72 hours, we had 5 of the 6 locking pins in place, and we decided that that was good enough. She was in position. It took another 3 days for the 6th one. She was playing hard to get. Simple. So being such a pristine aquatic environment, the environment and the environmental control was something of another level. We used 6.5 kilometers of ocean boom just to protect the shoreline. There was also absorbent booms, turbidity, sampling nets. Of course, they said don't worry about the weather, it never gets bad in Gilia. This was the first winter, which we called the Halloween storm. It was the very first storm of winter. It gave us quite a bit to worry about because the ship itself collapsed 2 meters that night. But we didn't know that she just settled onto the rocks, which was good for us, but still worrying all the same. So we knew that we couldn't install any sponsons in that type of weather. We had to be more patient. This was March. They've never seen a water spout in March. You need the summer heat and the summer water temperatures. So the environmentalists said it's impossible, you don't get them in March. we had 4. But it is a beautiful location with pristine sort of environment, and the visibility is fantastic. And we try to keep it that way. We had a mascot that joined us. The fishing was so good he couldn't fly anymore. So the Power Buckle week finally arrives. We had 530 people on the team, 55 coded welders and 12-hour shifts, 130 commercial divers. We had carried out 15,000 individual dives, 27,000 hours of ROV footage. Those are the remote operated cameras that watch the divers and everything else. The 19,900 tons of grout cement was increased to 24,000 to stabilize her after Power Buckle. 33,000 tons of steel was used in fabrication. You could build 2 Eiffel Towers with that. 9.3 tons of welding cables, 36 kilometers of welds on the sides here alone, and miles of electrical and control cables. So the whole control system for the Power Buckle was pneumatics and electro-hydraulics. This was the final test. People were getting nervous. It was a long weekend in Giglio, and they didn't want us to upset the tourism, so we postponed to Monday. It was an anxious wait. We pre-tensioned and tested everything up to 110% capacity to make sure that we knew what we had. We had, on the inshore side, we had 11,000 tons of putting capacity. On the offshore side, we had 13,500 tons. So we had more than 100% spare capacity just to assist with the breakout forces. No one knew what the profile of the rock inside the ship looked like. One last thing, my wife had to kiss her goodbye. Then we were ready. So this was the Power Buckle itself, time-lapse photography. We had a bad storm the night before, and we had an electrical storm that blew out 3 of the electronic control boards. So fortunately we had a spare one which we could replace, but it delayed us for 3 hours. And we were hoping to finish in 12 hours, but it actually took 19 hours. So it was actually quite a long day. You can see going through the night, she's starting to come up. She gets to a certain point in the rotation where the forces on the turn of the boat start dropping, and we can start breathing a sigh of relief. Also at that stage, the ballast tanks of the sponsons are entering the water on the offshore side so that she doesn't let gravity take over the operation and pull her upright without control. So we could then deballast the tanks as required and bring her down gently onto the platforms. Oops, missed one there. So you'll see that she speeds up quite quickly now. This was about 3 o'clock in the morning, and we wanted to make sure that she came onto the mattress as soon as possible. So that was the Power Buckle behind us. Even keel, she was about 1 meter over 300 meters by the bow, and 1 meter to port, which wasn't too bad. I think they dry docked the ship in a similar condition. But that could allow us to see the damage for the first time. You can see it underneath the funnel, and just aft of the bridge, there was almost this replica of what we had actually modeled in the FEM analysis. It was very, very similar. It was almost within 20 centimeters of the crushing forces. So this was coming up for winter. We built a tower crane into the swimming pool on the upper deck so we could work through winter on board, and we could demobilize some of the vessels and wait for spring. In the meantime, we had 19 more sponsons to do on the starboard side, and all of these would be connected to the chains that went underneath the ship and connected by strand jacks. So they would not be welded onto the side. We'd sink them, connect them on the chains, and then deballast them and let them suck alongside the ship's hull. Obviously, the storage space that we took for 6 months, we only just signed over last month, so they were happy with the storage fees. And this is how the ship's profile went. And you can see with the damaged area, we had to put some bumpers, false bumpers, to recreate a false side, especially in the way of the frames. This is the first one going on, number 18. You can see that the towers are there so that we'd sink it, and the strand jacks would still be above the surface. Then we carried on all the way down the starboard side, sinking them one by one. And then on the port side, we had hooks, so we welded on some hooks onto the port side, sunk these down, put them underneath the hooks, and then deballasted them. And the buoyancy brought them up against the hooks, and they were perfectly done on the port side. And this was the last two that we did, and she was almost ready for the refloat. So the refloat came and went. And this is a little summary of the operation.
Se repartieron las tabletitas para preguntas. ¿Alguien tiene preguntas sobre la presentación? Por acá, los muchachos de las actividades especiales que nos ayuden a recolectarla. Nick, how much cost the cost of the operation, the complete project? What's the first question?
Yeah, basically it's not a cheap operation. So if you look at the cost of our side of the project, it's over $800 million. The ship itself was worth $570 million. The demolition is going to cost about $180 to $200 million. So if you start adding all those figures together, you're well over the billion and a half for one man's inattention to detail. But I'm just going to say, ship salvage, it's a science based on vague assumptions, debatable figures, inconclusive instruments, performed with equipment of problematical accuracy by people of doubtful reliability and questionable mentality. Everything seems impossible, and then it's done. Thank you very much.
The great backs that you mentioned in the presentation, their content is reused or rejected?
Yeah, you can reuse it. It's natural. It's from Earth. So basically, if you recover the bags and you put it through a crusher, you can use it for landfill or something else. But it has to be recovered from the seabed.
What will you say will be your worst setback that you encountered during the job?
Yeah, I think the drilling, certainly the offshore drilling into the granite at that steep profile, the steep angle, and then we only started drilling in October, and the weather turned in October, so we had 3 10-year storms between October and February. I'm not sure why they call them 10-year storms, but we had 3. And that was the worst part of the whole operation. People were starting to doubt the project. The authorities were not happy, the client was not happy, the underwriters weren't happy. But we went through that.
This provoking method was previously used in another ship. Do you have experience of that history?
Yes, we've done power buckling before. One of the biggest power buckling operations ever done was in Hawaii on the Second World War, after the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor. So there were 70 vessels that were power buckled in the next couple of years because they had to get the ships back up and running. Obviously they were on a seabed and solid warships, so the steel is far harder and stronger and can take the forces. The Concordia is a passenger ship with a very light structure, and you could only rely on the very bottom section for any strength. Especially the location made it more complicated. But power buckling has been done quite a few times.
Okay. Instead of use the ship for scrap, why not cut in pieces or in the place? Why not or sink the ship?
Yeah, it was a crime scene, so there was still a crime scene. They wanted to investigate more about the ship. The captain denied he was responsible for the cause of the death, so he was blaming the ship's propulsion systems. So we had to power buckle her and then allow them to go and look at the bridge and all the control systems. It's a crime scene. There were still 2 bodies, so we couldn't cut it up in situ. Also, where she was finally balanced, it would mostly break. So the best way to preserve the environment is to remove all the pollutants inside the ship. It just became a very difficult ship to remove.
Aquí preguntan que dónde está el barco ahora. Where's the ship now?
She's in Genoa. They're starting a search and rescue or search for the last remaining body. We had a call this morning that they found some human fragments and they're doing DNA testing. So hopefully that would close out the last victim to be recovered. But she will be processed over the next 18 to 2 years, recycled and demolished.
Sí. Muchas preguntas sobre accidentes, si hubo muerte. Me imagino que durante la operación, during the operation, there's accident, death.
Yeah, we had several thousand people came through the project. We had 530. We had to rotate them at all times. At the end, we had 22,000 individual dives. We had 1 fatality with a diver who was crushed by a piece of steel. It ruptured his femoral artery. Unfortunately, we didn't have much chance to save him. We had 2 other fatalities on the job from natural causes. One captain had a heart attack and another diver had a ruptured aorta. So 3 of the salvage stayed behind as well.
Answer if you can. If you know where is the captain?
I think he's giving lectures on panic management, and that's a true story. He's just given a lecture in the University of Rome on panic management. So he's still under trial. His trial has been suspended for summer holidays.
Thank you. First applause for Sloan. Queremos reconocer al ingeniero director del día, nuestro secretario de la Transportación de la Pública, que hizo presencia aquí con nosotros. Gracias, amigo. Tenemos un reconocimiento que el colegio preparó para nuestro invitado y es una placa que dice así: in recognition to Mr. Nick Sloan, main speaker for the Professional College of Engineering and Land Surveyor in Puerto Rico, August 9, 2014, Río Grande, Puerto Rico, ingeniero Edgar Rodríguez Pérez. Al presidente de la Asociación de Navieros de Puerto Rico, el señor Hernán Ayala. Un aplauso. Gracias. Continúan ahora continúan los foros. Tenemos los exhibidores en toda la tarde, especialmente el de Roger Electric, que está aquí justo a la salida, no deben de visitarla. El señor Pedro Cuella, que pase acá, por favor. Pedro. Y mañana nuestra asamblea. Así que muchas gracias por haber estado aquí.